Oh, hello old friend, it's good to see you. Let's talk about this word, fascination. It describes an unquenchable urge, which compels our hearts to quest and be captivated. As long as there are elegant explanations to complicated phenomena, science will never lose its romance. Over the years, I've traveled the world, indulging in my fascination in physics. And now, I find that a new hunger has woken within me. A fiery need to share these great ideas with the people around me. And so, I have assembled a team of some of the greatest, most lucid, most creative minds I've encountered in my travels. And I call them my Titanium Physicists. You're listening to the Titanium Physicists podcast, and I'm Ben Tippett. And now, allez, physique! Let's talk about time. The basic deal with time is that some things change and they don't change back. So ice cubes melt into glasses of water, sand in an hourglass goes from the top ball and settles in the bottom ball, and sometimes people die. So time acts kind of like a ratchet for change. But the thing about physics, as it applies to particles bouncing off each other at the microscopic level, is that time shouldn't act like a ratchet. In quantum mechanics, anything that can happen can also unhappen. Let me explain it like this. Imagine you take a video camera and you put it over a pool table and focus it in on the 8-ball. And then you record a film of you smacking your cue ball into the 8-ball so that they hit each other and roll out the top of the screen. Alright? Now you can watch that video backwards or forwards. In backwards, you'd see the two balls coming in at the top, bumping into each other, and that would stop the 8-ball. Well, if you showed this video either backwards or forwards to a physicist and asked them, there's no way, using the laws of physics, they could tell whether the film was being played backwards or forwards, because these interactions are entirely consistent with the laws of physics, played backwards or played forwards. So, the moral of the story is you can't tell the difference between pool played forward and pool being played backwards. Except you can, right? I mean, at the start of a game of pool, all the balls start clumped together in the center. And then very shortly after the game starts, they're all over the place. So time, as we've described it, is something that shows up as a macroscopic phenomenon. It only shows up when you have a whole collection of objects interacting. Specifically, the passage of time can be described in terms of the change of a system from being neat to being disordered. So today, we're going to be talking about entropy. If the world of commerce and communication and intellectual property in the 20th century could be described in terms of billiard balls knocking around a table, then the onset of the internet could probably be described as hitting the pool table with a wrecking ball and then throwing it down a water slide. So, who is the man who has the vision to tell us the new rules of this game? Who's the man who reassuringly tells us to bravely face the chaos and to pluck its delicious fruit? Who's the cat that won't drop out when there's danger all about? It's Cory Doctorow. Hey, Cory.
I thought you were talking about Joseph Schumpeter, but okay.
Cory Doctorow is a blogger on boingboing.com. He's one of the world's most prominent minds in arguing in public for liberalized copyright laws and file sharing, and he's also a science fiction author. His book Little Brother won the 2009 Prometheus Award, the Sunburst Award, and the John W. Campbell Memorial Award. His latest book, The Rapture of the Nerds, A Tale of the Singularity, Post-Humanity, and Awkward Social Situations, just came out at the end of September, just in time for Christmas. All right, Cory, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
I'm really excited. So, for you today, I've assembled two of my finest thinking titanium physicists. Arise, Dr. Jocely Reed!
Rawr!
Dr. Jocely did her undergraduate at UBC, her PhD at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and she's currently faculty in the physics department at Cal State Fullerton. Now arise, Miles Steininger.
Wow.
Miles did his undergraduate with me at UBC, and he worked at D-Wave Systems, the people that just sold the world's first quantum computer. And he's a patent clerk. So hey Miles, how's the development of your theory of universal gravitation going?
Yeah, no, I should get back to that one.
All right, let's start talking about entropy. Essentially, entropy, it's a classical thermodynamic concept, so it came to prominence in the 1800s. So I thought the easiest way to explain this might start off by talking about how an internal combustion engine works. So, in essence, you have a piston, and you inject some vaporized gasoline into the chamber, and then you set the gasoline on fire, and this gives the gas inside this chamber a whole bunch of energy. The temperature goes right up, and then what happens is the chamber expands, and attached to the piston is a rod, and that rod pushes a wheel that goes around that pushes the wheels of your car around, right?
I don't own a car, but I understand that this is what other people's cars do.
And trains.
Trains,
and
locomotives,
like
right?
I take train. I'm a European. We take trains.
Yeah. So, in essence, back in the 1800s, when people were starting to build these engines, there was a question of how much energy you could get out of fuel. So you'd take this coal, or you'd take this gasoline, or you'd take whatever, and you'd light it on fire. Clearly, it's putting out a ton of energy, right? So it's putting out a lot of heat. That heat escapes out into the environment, and as it does, we can do things like force the heat to push a chamber wider and use that to do work. So we can use that to turn our motors. Incidentally, the question was, how efficiently can we make this? Can we make one of these systems 100% efficient? And the short answer is no. You can't. There's a fundamental limit to how efficiently you can make one of these engines. One way to imagine it is, when you light the gasoline on fire, that produces heat. The heat tries to escape out into the outside environment, and as it does, you know, your clever mechanic is stealing a little bit of that heat to do work, a little bit of taxation. But it can't steal it all. It can only steal a chunk of it. And so the sizable chunk of heat that doesn't get used for work is called entropy. In essence, it's a big chunk of the energy that we're never going to be able to use to do any useful work in the system.
Which is why engines get hot.
Which is why engines get hot. That's right. So, you know, expanding gases in thermodynamics are a little bit hand-wavy.
I think that the term you're looking for is airy-fairy.
Oh, airy-fairy. So I imagine things in terms of just, you know, a water wheel. We have a river. It's got a waterfall in it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up a great big wheel that's going to catch the water before it hits the basin at the bottom. And so as the water moves past the wheel, it's going to turn the wheel, and I can hook up the wheel to a generator and get power out that way. So what would one of these water wheels look like if it was 100% efficient? So the water, it's coming in, falling from a great height. It's got a whole bunch of velocity when it hits the wheel, and then it lands in a bucket inside the wheel, and then the bucket gets pulled down towards the ground. What would one of these systems look like if the wheel was 100% efficient and could collect all of the kinetic energy of this water falling down on it? And the answer is, well, if it was 100% efficient, the wheel wouldn't be able to turn. If it was 100% efficient, then it would mean that somewhere along the wheel the water would stop moving. And if the water's not moving, the wheel's not turning. So for the wheel to turn, the water has to be moving past it, and if the water's moving past it, it's got to retain some of its initial kinetic energy.
So this example has failed to illuminate things for me, because it seems to me that you could capture 100% of the energy of the water that has fallen, and then there would be some more water that was still falling, whose energy you hadn't captured, that you would then proceed to capture. I'm still not entirely understanding. I think maybe you're using a definition of 100% efficient that isn't immediately intuitive to me.
So 100% efficient means that when the water hits the top of the wheel, it's going to convert all its kinetic energy, which means all its speed, into the wheel, so that when it gets to the bottom of falling through the wheel, it will be stopped.
The water will be stopped.
The water will be totally stopped.
So assume a wheel is sort of a fractal, hairy infinitude of buckets, and of the precise width of the waterfall, which maybe has been like channelized by the U.S. Corps of Engineers.
Right.
And so the first bucket load of water has moved the wheel N, but there's a second bucket load of water that's come in while that first bucket load has been going around that continues to push the wheel and continues to push the wheel. I don't really quite understand what it is about 100% efficiency that implies that the thing stops working.
Well, you're going to need to get rid of the water you're done with.
Right.
And to get rid of it, you'll have to send it off with some speed.
Oh, okay, I got it. Right. Oh, right, okay. Now I understand.
So the ocean absorbs all of the energy. The ocean will heat up. All the energy of the water rushing into the ocean gets completely absorbed into the ocean, but we can't use that energy to power anything.
Right.
It's kind of the idea. So in terms of our ability to tax these natural systems and get energy out to, run our cars, there's a limit to the efficiency.
Right.
So the deal is that just from thermodynamics, nobody really knew what the deal with entropy was. They had established its existence using experimentation. No matter how efficient you build your steam locomotive, 30% of the heat will escape out and just cause your engine to heat up and won't go into turning the wheels of the train. But the fantastic thing is that somehow we were able to explain this thing called entropy, this number, this quantity, in terms of something called statistical mechanics. Statistical just means statistics, and mechanics refers to how things move around and bump into each other. It's just the name of the field.
Right, it's a kind of macroeconomic look at the microphenomena.
Oh, yeah! That's exactly what it is.
It's how you describe something where you have so many components that you don't want to sit down and try and track them all, or it's maybe even impossible with your resources to track them all, but you can talk about their average properties. So, for example, I'm sitting in this room, there's some air around me, I don't know where every molecule of oxygen and hydrogen is in this room, but I know that there's an average temperature, which is basically the average speed of all the molecules. I know there's a pressure, which comes from the average collisions of all those molecules with me. So all these sort of average properties are well defined by thinking of what a bunch of basically randomly moving molecules average out to.
It's like if you drop the rope precisely at 8 a.m. at the end of Main Street, you know that 20% of the crowd is going to go to Space Mountain, but you don't know which 20% or exactly which steps they'll take.
It's like Avogadro's number, 10 to the 23 or something, right? There's just this monstrous number of particles that make up all gas, all liquids, all solids. Because there's a ton of these individual particles, you stop treating them like they're individual particles and you start treating them like an ensemble. Just like, you can't track every raindrop that hits your roof, but you can talk about the pressure of the rain on the roof.
Right.
And so thermodynamics, people building steam engines, it was concerned with things like temperature, pressure, these macroscopic quantities that we could measure. And what statistical mechanics did was it gave you a way to describe all of these large observable quantities in terms of averages from these, kabillion different particles bouncing around.
Mm-hmm.
So the deal is that statistical mechanics also gives us an insight into where entropy comes from. And it's fantastic because it's not an obvious quantity the way the average energy of the particle would turn into the temperature. It's kind of an emergent property of the system as a whole.
So in thermodynamics, a system where the entropy stays constant is one where every step can be reversed. As soon as you do something irreversible, like, for example, I have a gas in this little container, and then I open a window into a bigger container, and the gas just expands out. Now, it's never going to just sort of expand back into its little container again.
So I understand irreversible changes. Mm-hmm. What's a good example of a reversible change?
So you generally make things reversible by making them slow enough that each individual step along the way is in equilibrium. So you slow everything down and do it so that at each point you can either go forwards or backwards without changing the system. I'm not sure.
So is reversible stuff the kind of thing that happens in Gedanken experiments but not so much in the physical world?
Right. So physically, we almost never see an exactly reversible process, but you can get a closer and closer to reversible thing. Like, for example, so something that's reversible would be bouncing a rubber ball, and the ball falls down, bounces, and comes back up again. And in an ideal system where it squishes and then expands without losing any energy, it would come back to the original point, and you can't tell the difference between playing that forward or backwards.
Right.
Yeah, so reversible is basically something that can continue forever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, if I had a perfect elastic ball that didn't dissipate any heat, I could drop it, it would come back to my hand, then it would fall down again, come back to my hand, and it would just do this forever.
Right.
But really what happens, in pretty much any system we actually have is some of the compression of the rubber doesn't get returned to its exact original state, but it heats the rubber ball up a little bit. And we lose that energy, and that increases the entropy of the system, and then the ball doesn't quite get up to its original position, and so that's no longer reversible. That's an irreversible process, is one where we've produced some entropy, because at least classically, you can never reduce entropy overall.
Yeah.
Now, is the noise of the ball bouncing also contributing to the entropy?
That's right.
This is actually something that's worth pointing out, is that when we think about the Duncan experiments, we often do this frictionless and in a vacuum, so we can disregard things like noise.
Right.
Yeah.
So incidentally, the statistical mechanics explanation for entropy kind of accommodates this whole idea of irreversible interactions. So one way to characterize it is, like, if you imagine you have a glass of milk in your hands. Okay, it's kind of cylindrical. If you tilt the glass of milk a little bit to the left or the right, everything in the glass will slosh a little bit and settle. And then if you tilt it back to its original position, everything will be indistinguishable from how it started. The milk won't be appreciably heated up, and then everything will be kind of where it started out. So that's an example of a reversible interaction. An irreversible one, if you have a glass of milk, is if you took a dropper full of food coloring and you dropped a couple drops of food coloring in it, the food coloring would start off as a dot in the milk, and then as it diffused through the milk, there would be no way to return the system to back when all of the dye was a drop at the center. Eventually it becomes dissipated throughout the milk, and there's no getting it back. In statistical mechanics, entropy kind of works like this. The argument is, I want you to imagine that there is a great big room, like a racquetball court. And you've divided the racquetball court into 8 regions, the upper quadrants and the lower quadrants. And then you get your friend the Hulk to walk in and wang the racquetball against the wall and then close the door.
Have an ideal racquetball here.
You have an ideal racquetball.
Assume a uniform, a perfectly spherical racquetball of uniform density.
That's right, and it's not losing any energy to heat. All of its bouncing off the walls is completely reversible. So it's banging around on the inside of this racquetball court. So it's the same way a particle would on the inside of a chamber, say. And you don't know where it is. It could be in one of the 8 different octants. And so you can deal with it statistically. You can say, well, there's a 1 in 8 chance that it will be in any of the octants. So that's fine, trivial, I guess. So then you imagine that your friend the Hulk walks in with 4 different racquetballs, each a different color, and then throws them against the walls and closes the door. Suddenly we can start talking about the macroscopic distribution of racquetballs in this racquetball court, in terms of the statistical probabilities of each of the different racquetballs, right?
So each octant would have half a racquetball on average?
Yes, that's right. But then it becomes less and less probable that, say, 4 of the racquetballs are in the lower southeast quadrant. And even more so if you go in with, 300 racquetballs and wang them around. Suddenly you've got this big ensemble, and it becomes very, very improbable that all of the racquetballs are in the left-hand lower quadrant. And it's much more probable that the racquetballs are more evenly distributed.
And extrapolating this is why you don't worry about suddenly suffocating in your room because the air suddenly randomly bounced all up to one corner.
Right.
Because there's a fantastically huge number of air molecules in your room, and any particular air molecule, just like the racquetballs, has an equal chance of being in any of the octants of your room. But when you sum up, something like 10 to the 30 air molecules or so in your room, the chance that all 10 to the 30 of them are in 1/8 of the volume gets so low that it's never going to happen in the age of the universe.
Right.
So you quantify the entropy of a particular state, which is the way that all the air molecules or the racquetballs are positioned, by the number of different ways that you can construct that state out of individual molecules.
Okay.
So to return to the horrible ink in the milk experiment.
We use green food coloring around our place. Called goblin milk.
Right. So when you're making goblin milk, technically you imagine each of these little dye particles bouncing around randomly inside of the, volume of milk. And technically it's possible that all of the droplets of dye start off closely packed in the same region.
But you set it up that way, where they're all in that one region.
Right. But then as time goes on and these droplets of dye get bounced around, their distribution throughout the overall glass of milk kind of becomes random, to the point where it becomes less and less probable that all of the droplets of milk will return to their original tiny droplet configuration.
So can I skip ahead a bit here? Because I kind of know where this is going. So here's the question. So leaving aside the question of how it is that we can be so counter-entropic, right? That we appear to have gone from a state of disorder to a state of order to become human beings who talk about physics. In general, I would think that most of the stuff that you did would be entropic as well, that, in general, you'd sort of be contributing to the general decay of your body every time you moved it. But we seem to do a bunch of things that are counter-entropic as well, like we know things better, we learn about physics, which seems to me to be counter-entropic. We take disorganized neurons and reorganize them, and yet sometimes we do things that are more entropic, like we take some nicely organized green food coloring and we put it in a glass of milk and contribute to the general entropy of the universe. What is it that gives rise to one class of counter-entropic activities that we seem to be able to undertake, and then this other class that is? And do they all balance out somehow since entropy can't be reduced? Is there like a cosmic balance sheet where every time you learn about physics you have to put some green food coloring in a glass of milk?
Yeah, everything you do is increasing the entropy of the universe. Mm-hmm. Even if you're putting a little bit of the universe into order, the physical process that led to you organizing all your pens neatly on your desk, you've spent a lot of energy, your body is generating heat, your net contribution to the universe's entropy, even while you were precisely arranging all your pens, is to increase the entropy. So I actually had a whole thing with my college roommate where I had a really messy room, and she made this joke that you're so entropic, you're always increasing the entropy of your surroundings. And I was like, well, no, because all that effort you put into tidying up is, on the whole, contributing more to the heat death of the universe than me just sort of living in my natural state of mess. Because you picking up all your stuff and putting it back into the original places is actually contributing more mess to the universe as a whole than me just leaving things scattered everywhere.
So that seems to imply that by participating in natural selection rather than all of us sort of walking into the ocean with our pockets full of rocks, that we are increasing the entropy of the universe and hastening the heat death and the Stelliferous period and all the rest of it.
Yes, but don't worry about it.
The time scales you're talking about here are the entropy you contribute relative to the rest of the entropy of the universe. It's minuscule. It's a drop in the ocean.
Let me give you a fun example of this. There's a great explanation, but first I need to talk to you about air conditioners. So if you take, a piece of ice and put it on the table, it's going to melt, right? And the reason it melts is, in essence, all of the little motes of energy in the room say, hey, how come we're not sitting inside that ice cube? And there's like, well, statistically, there's no reason we shouldn't move into the ice cube. So, the energy slowly starts to flow into the ice cube, and that raises its temperature and it melts. But where did the ice cube come from, right? We have cooling devices. They're called heat pumps because they pump heat away from things that cool the ice, refrigerators and air conditioning units. So we can make a region, say the inside of your freezer, but in doing so, it's always going to take more heat.
So on the back of your refrigerator is that whole radiator system of coils that are releasing extra heat out to the environment to compensate for the decrease in temperature and the decrease in randomness inside the fridge. And that's the same reason why if you have an air conditioning unit, it always has something that's venting to the outside. That's actually always pushing extra heat, producing more heat than you actually are taking away from inside and pushing it out to the external environment.
What about non-exhausting coolers like swamp coolers? I mean, a simple one is a fan in a bucket of water, basically, and blowing over a mesh with damp cloth on it.
So evaporation is taking the ordered liquid and spitting it out into the air as random evaporated molecules. So there's one increase in randomness there.
It seems to be possible to cool a room without exhaust.
So when something evaporates, when it goes from liquid to gas, it actually requires, it's taking energy to do that transition.
Aha. So you're sucking energy out of the room by evaporating water.
Yes. So this phase transition of liquid to vapor is actually taking energy out of the system. And you must continually be putting water in and evaporating more water to keep this going. So you're always taking this liquid state and changing it into a more disordered gaseous state.
Right.
I think we can relate the room example, go back to Cory's question about basically the entropy in being causes or the lack of entropy that light appears to embody. And that's sort of, let's get back to the definition of what we're talking about. We're thinking about the second law of thermodynamics, which we haven't mentioned. It applies to really a closed system. And you have to really think about what is the system you're analyzing. And where are you dumping this waste heat? Or where are you getting this cold water from? Always has to be taken into consideration for room cooling. You should also think about this, as a being appears to learn physics or tidy their desk, that they appear to locally be contributing to a lack of entropy, but they're part of a larger system. Or if we think about life evolving, we really have to think about the greater system and not just the living beings in it. So often these questions for me always come down to what is the system? And then that allows you to analyze a diversity of different systems.
So ignoring whatever latent energy there was embodied in the Earth as it cooled, the energy of the Earth that I'm interested in talking about arises from photons striking the Earth from the sun, and also from some gravitational stresses. And the only energy we use is the energy that's on the Earth. So all these photons have already struck the Earth and have done something to it. And then we make use of them. We turn them to do work. And that work sometimes has exhaust heat and sometimes it doesn't. But since we can't create energy, and since we're only using energy that was already here to begin with, do we on net increase the entropy of the system that is, say, the solar system?
Yes.
Where do we get the energy to increase the entropy of the solar system?
From the sun. Let's simplify this radically and just say, what if we just had the heat of the sun, but we also have the relative coolness of space? And it's this difference between the two that lets us siphon off some work from this. But as we do that, the heating of space is increasing the overall entropy of the system.
So Miles mentioned the word closed system earlier, and right now, classically, we're in an open system because we can dump as much heat as we want off into space. So if we had surrounded the solar system with a great big sphere made of mirrors, okay, so that all of the light emitted out into space bounced back towards the sun, eventually we wouldn't be able to do any decent work. None of our machines would work. We'd reach a level of maximal entropy inside the box.
That was where everything was at basically the same temperature as the temperature of stuff leaving the sun, and then we wouldn't be able to do anything. Aside from the fact that we have problems living at the temperature of, say, the solar surface. But once we reach an equilibrium with the sun and the environment, if everything is at the same temperature, then that's basically a sort of local heat death.
So I've heard entropy described as the point at which everything is cooled down, but it sounds like you're describing maximal entropy as the point at which everything is heated up.
The point where everything's at the same temperature. And if you're averaging over a universe, that turns to be pretty cool.
So if you had a locomotive, right? So the locomotive, it's got this really hot chamber where you're shoveling coal into. If the outside of the locomotive was as hot as the inside of that chamber, then the locomotive wouldn't be able to do any work. And we would describe that as a type of heat death, because a system that's had heat death is one where there's no localized energy that you can kind of tax as it moves outwards. So all the ice cubes have melted, all of the fires have gone out, because all of our machines don't work on energy, really. They work on kind of taxing the transmission of energy between somewhere hot and somewhere cold. And in some sense, all of life on Earth does the same thing. It's absorbing photons that come from the really hot sun. We're taxing that energy as it moves out into space to run all of our organs and make our plants grow so that we can eat them.
Ben, should we be skipping forward a bit more to Maxwell's demon?
Sure, let's talk about Maxwell's demon.
So this is a kind of a neat thought experiment. So even back when the first ideas of this idea that you always are transferring energy from hot to cold, that you need this sort of constant increase in entropy all the time, that there was actually already some ideas of ways this can be got around. And so Maxwell proposed this thought experiment, which is later called Maxwell's demon, which says, okay, well, I have a way to get around this constant increase in entropy. So we talked about how if you have a volume of air and you expand it into twice the volume and the air all bounces out, it never will randomly bounce back in to just being on one side.
Right.
Or if you have a hot and cold side, you let them mix together, then they won't just randomly separate out into the hot and cold side again.
Right.
But then Maxwell said, well, what if I have, a little molecular scale entity sitting there? And people later proposed various sort of mechanical apparatuses to make this more concrete. But you have your little demon sitting there, and the demon's got a little window that it can open and close in a reversible, smooth way. So it's got a very well-sliding door that it takes basically no effort to slide it up, slide it down. And the demon sits there, and there's the gas on the right and the gas on the left. And whenever a particularly quick-moving molecule on the right side is heading towards the door, he lifts up the door, the molecule goes through, he closes the door again, and if a particularly slow-moving molecule is coming from the left, lifts up the door, lets the slow molecule through, closes the door again, and then through these individually reversible processes, he's converted the average speed of the molecules to be fast on one side and slow on the other. And this seems to be countering this idea that you can't do that. He's decreased the entropy of the system because there's less ways where you can have all the fast ones on one side and all the slow ones on the other.
Right.
So that makes
So
sense.
I'm waiting for you to get to the part where you explain why that doesn't work.
Well, it's really interesting because it took a long time for people to figure out why that wouldn't work. And this is actually getting into the interpretation of entropy as relates to information. So to do this, the daemon has to basically make a measurement. It has to set up something in its system of opening and shutting the door, which correlates with a property of the molecule coming towards it. So it has to record the properties of this molecule. So we can simplify this down to, say, setting a bit. And the thing that stops this from working is, so either you need to keep setting bits and more bits, basically requiring more and more tape.
Why do you need to retain the state of the previous molecule as opposed to just knowing the state of the next one?
Turns out to erase the previous state, you need to increase entropy a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And this is exactly enough to counterbalance the decrease in entropy going on in the main system. So the system of Maxwell's daemon includes the daemon's memory, and memory is the entropy increase that says as a whole, the system as a whole is not actually decreasing in entropy.
So this is the bit where I get slightly confused because my brain keeps trying to equivocate entropy and disorder. And of course, knowing about stuff is not what you think of when you think of disorder. The idea that somehow knowing a bunch of facts about molecules is disorderly and not knowing the facts about molecules is orderly is weird.
So if you imagine Maxwell's daemon sitting just outside the box with his piece of paper and his pencil and his open and close switch, so him writing things down on the piece of paper is increasing the disorder of the entire room that he's sitting in, including the box. So if he's sitting inside the box, then him writing things down is increasing the number of possibilities that, the various matter inside the box can take, and then the whole ensemble of him recording the information plus all the stuff going on in the box.
You mentioned clever mechanical linkages before. What if, instead of a daemon, there's a channel leading out of the box that if a molecule comes at it really quickly, it will bounce out of? And that's the slow channel, and it leads to the slow box. And there's a channel leading out of the box that slow ones can't go fast enough to get through, but the fast ones can, and that's the fast one. And you can make...
now that's an interesting idea, some sort of velocity filter.
You can do a mechanical velocity filter. You can just have a spring-loaded trapdoor, and it only lets them through if they're moving fast to bounce the door. That spring-loaded trapdoor has to be cold enough to stay closed. Uh-huh. And if you passpools bouncing off it all the time, they heat it up enough so it just starts bouncing around on its own.
All right, that was fun. So thanks, Miles and Jocelyn. You've pleased me. Your efforts have borne fruit, and that fruit is sweet. Here's some fruit, Jocelyn. You get an apple. And Miles, you get the most entropic of all fruit, grapes.
Nom, nom, nom.
Awesome. All right, I'd like to thank my guest, Cory Doctorow. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. This was very enlightening and interesting and fun.
I hope you had lots of fun.
I did.
All right. Hi, TIE Fighters. Listen. you might want to contact us. After all, talking about physics is lots and lots of fun. So you can visit our webpage at www.titaniumphysics.com, where I post notes on each show. If you want to keep abreast of what's new with the show, you can follow us on Facebook. Sometimes we post news stories and chat there. Or you can follow us on Twitter at @titaniumphysics. If you'd like to join a community of like-minded fans, you can sign up for the Brachio board. It's an old-fashioned message board where we talk about science and culture. Finally, you can just email us directly. To send me a question about the show, email me at barn@titaniumphysics. If you'd like to join my crew, email me at physics@titaniumphysics. And if you'd like to send us an encouraging note, try TIE Fighter, TIPHYTER @titaniumphysics.com. Okay, that's it for the main part of the show. There's probably some more after the music. But remember, if you've enjoyed listening to scientists talk about science in their own words, you might also like to listen to other shows on the Brachio Media Network, like Science Sort of and the Weekly Wienersmith. Today's show was edited in part by a gentleman named John Heath. Thank you very much, John. Your work is invaluable. The intro song to our show is by Ted Leo and the Pharmacists, and the end song is by John Vanderslice. Until next time, my friends, keep science in your hearts.
Angela, don't be mad. There's something I gotta tell you, dear, before you come back here. I lost your bunny. I let him out of the cage. He was eating spring mix on the carpet. Jumped through a window out into the haze. Hop down Magnolia Boulevard. No way he'll survive.
All right, Cory, have you ever heard the word entropy before?
I have. There's actually a great science fiction story. I've been trying to find the name of it while I've been on the phone with you. From British shared world anthology called Temps, which there's premises that all the good superheroes have gone to America, and the remaining superheroes live in Britain with their very bad powers, and they're licensed by the Ministry of Superpowers. And one of them is called in to investigate someone who's built an Entropy ray, which turns out to be a badly spelled entropy ray. And it's a very good story. I won't give it away. But every time I hear entropy, I think, Entropy!
What did the entropy ray do?
Well, so the premise was that this nuclear power plant was falling apart because someone was using an Entropy ray against it to make it disintegrate. Well, I'll give away the ending anyway. No one's going to find this ancient anthology. And it turns out that the whole thing was a scam cooked up by people who were smuggling parts out of the nuclear power plant and selling them and replacing them with really broken down parts, and that they'd cooked up the Entropy ray to hide their action because, of course, in a world with superpowers, you might have Entropy rays. And it was to this person who had this superpower to discover it. And his superpower turned out to be that he could make his pint glass want other people's beer. And when the villains tie him up in the end and have caught him, he convinces his pint glass that it wants their blood. And he drains all of the blood out of their bodies, and then they die.
Took a dark turn.
It does. It takes a dark turn at the end. It was a good series though. Temps, and they did one called Euro Temps, which was about European temps with very bad superpowers who are regulated by a pan-European Ministry of Superpowers.
Okay, so that's the idea of entropy as something that is why things tend to break and don't tend to just fix themselves.
The center not holding.
Yeah. It's interesting that you start out with a place in Europe and also a connection to beer, because historically, entropy came from a study of beer brewing and things like that in Europe.
Is this reversible in the same sense that people mean when they talk about reversible computation?
It is in a very interesting way, because you can have an ideal system which is reversible. Also, microscopic systems sort of start approaching things that are reversible. And people have constructed computers, or imagined what computers would look like if constructed out of things like billiard balls, and then analyzed what it would take for such systems to be reversible. And it basically comes down to how much heat is dissipated in each logic gate of your billiard ball computer, or something like that. And so it very much does relate to reversible versus unreversible computation. And we'll touch upon that later.
There's a Rudy Rucker novel called Post-Singular where the entirety of the Earth is deconstructed and reassembled as rod logic that then does a whole bunch of work and then reverses the work.
It just ends up in the same state it started?
That's right, yeah. So there, 2/3 of the way through the novel, there's this climax where everything's put back the way it was about 1/3 of the way back.
Uh-huh.
So getting back to where this all started, my 4-year-old, when she's not drinking goblin milk, is very concerned about death and wants to know why we have to die and wants to know why we can't change death and so on and so forth. But it sounds like in an open system, if you just don't care about how much of the sun's energy or how many different stars' energy you're willing to pour in, you could eventually get all the food coloring out of the swimming pool. Is that right?
Yeah. You could pull out, 1 teaspoon at a time of water that doesn't have any dye in it until all that was left was a puddle of dye, if you were patient enough.
In some sense, entropy is responsible for the passage of time. The fact that we die has some other biology to it, which is sort of beyond the scope of just how things change.
Well, I thought biology was just chemistry and chemistry was just physics.
Right. But so in principle, everything, on the lowest physical description of the interactions of molecules is reversible.
Right.
And then we have stuff like, say, cosmic ray goes through and messes up some of our DNA, and then maybe we have some mechanisms in the cells that can repair this. So yeah, it's all physics, but the fact is, how well does our biological system do at keeping itself repaired and going? And what is its sort of evolutionary basis to justify the level of support for a long-term organism's lifespan? There's very long-lived biological entities out there, but it requires constant energy input to maintain themselves.
So they also do very little.
Right. Yeah. They're very slow-moving. Your average redwood doesn't do a lot of running around.
I get this now. So getting back to brains and life and immortality and mortality, there's this reductionist singularity argument, not singularity like black hole, the other kind, that goes, it's a kind of little puppet show between an interlocutor and a wise singularitarian, and the interlocutor says, I don't believe in this singularity nonsense. You can't put a person in a computer. And the singularitarian says, well, what if I cut off the tip of your toe and replaced it with a computer? Would that still be you? And, of course it would still be me. And working, by millimeters, the singularitarian works up the interlocutor's body until he gets to the brainstem. And then, one layer of cells at a time says, is it still you? Is it still you? And at the end, the interlocutor has to admit, why, yes, of course it's possible to put a human in a computer. But, this actually seems to me to be not a very good argument, because if you assume that, the way that you would test to see whether that was you in the computer versus you out in the real world, the only test that we really have in the literature for figuring out whether an AI is really an AI is a Turing test, where you would ask meet you and computer you a bunch of questions and see whether you answered them the same way. You'd expose yourselves to stimulus and see whether your response was the same. And asked that way, if you go up to a concert pianist who says, I don't believe you can upload a person into a computer, and the wise singularitarian says, here, I'm going to amputate both of your hands. Are you still you? The answer would probably be no, right? There are a whole bunch of stimuli that you could feed concert pianist with hands and concert pianist without hands. And concert pianist without hands would not respond to those stimuli in the same way that concert pianist with hands would. Or, the other example is like tomcat with testicles, tomcat without testicles, right? So when I started thinking about this, I realized that not only could you not get the same answers out of you after amputating some important parts and you before amputating some certain parts, but you also couldn't get the same answers out of you over time, that 10 years ago you would answer some important questions very differently from the way that you of now would answer them. And that while from moment to moment we are still us, over longer time scales in the same way that from moment to moment French is French, but over long time scales, French becomes lots of different languages, or Latin becomes lots of different languages that no longer interoperate smoothly, or species become fully speciated. One of the things you guys are talking about is discrete systems, and what constitutes the boundary of a system, and when a system is still the system, and when it ceases to be the system because it's blended with the system next door. And I wonder if there's any neat concepts out of this theory that we can use to solve the conundrum of where the nexus of the continuity of identity lives.
That is a very big question. May I take a stab at it?
Sure.
I think there's touches on some interesting things. I think, though, it really comes down to me. I'm always trying to think about what is the system, and why is it that as time goes on, we seem to, a simple recording device will simply fit, set bits in some sort of encoding, or our brain will learn physics or learn French or something like this, and that seems to be ordered, and yet the system, we know that for system, disorder should increase over time. And it really comes down to what is the system in my mind. And this really relates to probably the most philosophical aspects of entropy, which is basically there's this arrow of time that psychologically we experience time going forward and never going backwards. And it's believed, a human brain or a computer memory is sort of establishing correlations with its outside world. And the human brain might be getting more ordered, or the computer memory might be obtaining order, assuming that it was sort of in a random state to start with, and not all initially set to 0 or all 1. And over time, these correlations, these sort of form what is, the thing we call memory, or a record in the case of a computer medium. And so we think, well, this system is getting ordered. But we have to also consider the outside world that we're interacting with. I think that starts us on the road to answering the question, can you then start reducing a human being down to a bunch of information? It might be a matter of simply working out what are all the questions you need to interrogate about. And I'm not certain that you'll ever see anything like that ever being done. But from an information theoretic perspective, it might be entirely possible.
So I mean, this is another tangent that's just something that I always thought was sort of interesting, was that when we think of ourselves as discrete entities, we usually do that at a single snapshot in time. If we look at ourselves over multiple periods of time, if we look at ourselves in a space-time perspective, not only is that a system that's there's a Buddhist quote that I don't remember where it's from. Like, we are waves on an infinite ocean. So we are a pattern, a slowly changing pattern, but the actual molecules comprising this pattern are constantly entering and leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really no physically very precise defined boundary that you can put around yourself over a period of years, because which particular atoms make you up are constantly changing. And
so why distinguish between the pattern that we are for all the years during which, quote, we are alive, and the pattern that we are when we're dead? Because we remain a pattern after we die.
Yeah, we do, but we stop when we die. I guess this is this idea that maintaining the pattern in the way that we think of it requires this constant flow of energy and this constant of the system back to something like it was a little while ago.
But we don't maintain the pattern, right? That's the whole point.
But we don't maintain it exactly, but we maintain features of it.
Right. Although we spend the first 20-some years of your life are spent in the opposite of that, right? The whole point of the first 20 years of your life is to replace the pattern as quickly as possible with other patterns, and we call that growth. And then we reach this arbitrary point where we have to maintain that pattern. And then at some other arbitrary point, we say, well, these gross changes that are occurring day to day are not growth, but decay. We started this off with a physicist not being able to tell the difference between the triangle of balls at the start of a billiards game and the balls after the break, or the video of the breaking ball. But is there some way, from a kind of physics perspective, that we can distinguish between a pattern that is growing and a pattern that's decaying?
That's a really nicely posed thing, and I'm sure that someone has thought about it, but so I want to say yes, but I don't have a good formulation for it yet. So when we decay, then we're following the simplest path towards, well, I mean, it's complicated because there's all sorts of these other entities absorbing bits of our matter and doing things with it. So
let me take a crack at this. So at some point in time when we start to refer to ourselves, the very nature of our own identities is a little bit philosophically ill-defined, right? I mean, if we had a really strong concept of what it meant to be a person who was alive and not dead and, highly functioning and all these other things, I'm sure that philosophically world history would have evolved in a very different way. And once we start to refer to ourselves just in terms of patterns, it starts to ebb away at the very nature of ourselves as an individual, right? I mean, so at what point in time does the avocado I ate start being part of me and stop being part of the avocado tree or the avocado system of life? And at some point in time, I think you just start imagining it in terms of wars between little bits of DNA that, somehow manage to sneak off and make new patterns of DNA on once or twice in the lifetime of a large individual. Conversely, if we want to argue ourselves about patterns, one thing that you can argue is that the universe, the world, everything we see in the universe today can be constructed as a very large but finite systems of choices, say, okay? So everything's made of quantum mechanical particles, and quantum mechanical particles make choices, kind of. Right? They can decide to be spin up or spin down, or they can decide to be here and not there, on the left and not the right. And the kind of, I'm anthropomorphizing here, but the choices they make kind of determine the causal evolution of the universe. So because I, as a person sitting here, am in essence just sitting on a really large but finite set of choices, there's no reason that somebody, millions and trillions of light years away from me, somewhere else in this infinite universe, isn't sitting on the same stack of choices, right? There's no reason why there isn't another Ben Tippett sitting in front of a microphone doing his podcast, indistinguishable from myself and all my friends, but, a gazillion light years away.
Although isn't that a bit like the likelihood that all the oxygen in the room would find itself in the top southwest quadrant?
Oh, quite the opposite. I mean, so there's a finite possibility that all of the oxygen would find itself in the southeast quadrant of the room for half a second, right? But the universe is infinite, and it's infinite in such a way that the infinity of the size of the universe is much larger than the tiny possibility that all of the particles could end up in the southeast corner of the room. So somewhere in this large infinite universe, there's a little girl who can't breathe because all the oxygen molecules are in the southeast corner of the room.
Right.
And just so, somewhere else in the universe, there's a Ben Tippett speaking on a mic. And so one could ask, what's the distinction between myself and this person that's really far away if all of the choices that the particles leading up to my creation and sitting here made are indistinguishable from the ones that made me? So in terms of a pattern, it's an identical pattern. So am I the same person? I don't know. As the person far off there? I think that this kind of demonstrates that the whole notion of identity is a little bit... It's a castle built on sand. When we try to probe around at its roots, we find that little bits of the argument fall off left and right.
Ben, God help us if more than one of you.
Oh, no, there's an infinite number of me.
Oh, man.
Wait. I mean, this is an idea of the infinite universe, which isn't really empirical.
Yeah, why shouldn't there be... Okay, so what would the end of the universe look like? It's clear that the universe can't have a boundary. If it did have a boundary, what would be beyond that boundary? By its nature, the universe has to either be closed in on itself, maybe it's a gigantic three-dimensional sphere, or it's just infinite, and cosmological tests tell us
you
that
talked about degrees of infinity. Maybe it's infinite, but not infinite enough to have an infinite number of U's in it.
Yeah, that's. I think that you only need a finite number of choices. It's very, very large, but it's not infinite to make a Ben sitting here. You only need, particles bumping into each other in such and such a way to make me sitting on the Earth circling the sun. Indistinguishable from me today.
So I should get running soon, but I guess that I want to close this out by asking you the question that I started with, which is, or that I've been wrestling with, which is, what do I tell my 4-year-old when she gets really upset at the thought of dying and wants to know if she can live forever?
I think it's wrong to tell her that nothing actually exists, but our recognition that they exist. That's a little bit too deep.
Yeah. She has a babysitter whose dog died, and the babysitter told her the dog went to Kevin. It took me a while to figure out what she meant by this. Kevin? Yes, the dog went to Kevin. Everything that's dead goes to Kevin.
Wouldn't the dog go to Devin and the cats go to Kevin?
That's right, yes. And I've been tempted to say that Kevin's where we all end up, but I'm very bad.
So you could talk a little bit about how the fact that there's change means that she can do everything that she can do. Mm-hmm. And the fact that change happens means that there's this idea that the things that don't die are pretty boring during their lives.
I think her answer would be, I would like to change and not die.
So this, and as a parent, my kid's coming up to 1 now, I have no experience in this matter, but I have to get ready for it, is that in theory, we could make it so she wouldn't have to die. In theory. We might not be able, it's such a large task that we might not have the project ready in time, and everybody else that she loves would be negatively affected by that choice.
Oh, she also wants us all to live forever, too.
Yeah.
She solved that one. She doesn't want the animals in the zoo to eat other animals, but she also doesn't want them to starve to death. There are questions in this world that are a lot harder than physics. And many of them come out of the mouths of, 3 to 8-year-olds.
I'm not sure an understanding of entropy is really going to help with that kind of question.
No, entropy means that you're going to die no matter what you do.
This is the bit, yes. Seems to be the problem.
Unhelpful.
If only we had an Entropy ray.
Yeah, and then Entropy ray actually sounds really awesome, and I need to find that book. But this is more, we're not speaking directly to your daughter, and nor should we get between a parent and a child. We're more trying to give you a framework, potentially, from which to answer the question. And the answer is, don't have a clue.
Right, yes. Let's go for ice cream.
You could say something like, entropy is something that drives people as they get old to get more and more frail and uncomfortable, until the point where if somebody's 120, they're pretty much miserable all the time.
Not true.
130.
Well, yeah.
There's a point at which time all your bones are brittle and your head hurts all the time. And you can't remember anybody. And all of these are just kind of the trail of all these entropy slugs wandering through your body over the course of your life. And there's nothing for it, but, death at some point in time becomes kind of a sympathetic release to the horrors of enduring entropy. Right?
Well, that's a great thing to tell a 4-year-old.
Thank God we don't have to become conscious as our bodies
on the plus side, after you die, we can put you under the pillow, and the death fairy will leave us £1. So.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, Ben, do not say sympathetic release from any of my children. I only have one of them right now.
I'll go get in a card.
I have a thought, actually.
Okay,
yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the thing is, when we think about this 4-dimensionally again, and we think about the pattern of ourselves going through our lives, does she get really upset that at some point she wasn't born?
No, but she gets really upset that she's no longer able to go to daycare when she wants. She loves school, but there are days where she would really like to go to daycare.
So the thing is that the fact that she wasn't in existence, and then she is in existence, and then she, or there's no pattern, there's a pattern, and the pattern fundamentally changes in death somehow, it's sort of no more sensical to get upset about death than you do about someone not being there before they're born.
Yeah, I don't think she's going to find that argument compelling, though I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think that there's a certain personalness to well, you know what it is? It's loss aversion, right? Now we're getting into behavioral economics, but you know, we value things that we've had a lot more than we value things that we've never had.
Mm-hmm.
Or even when there's no good reason to do so. We charge more in behavioral economics experiments to give up things than we would spend to get them.
All right, I've got one last guess, and it has nothing to do with thermodynamics about what you can say, but it has to do with four-dimensional thinking.
All right.
So imagine all of the atoms that make you up, composing your pattern, as weaving in and out and building your pattern. So water enters and leaves your body. Apricots enter and leave your body. The molecules that make up apricots, all of your cells replace themselves within a finite amount, 7 years or something, right? But and yet this pattern endures. So if you think about it four-dimensionally, this pattern exists, and it will always exist, and it will always have existed as a pattern on this large tapestry, as the future weaves itself from different threads.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's like this circle of life. It's like the opening of the Lion King on a micro scale.
All will have lived.
Yes.